now time to take a look at news stories making headlines around the globe. We begin in the Senate, where the Senate has granted approval to President Bola Tinubu's request for external borrowing of $21.5 billion. It also approved another 2.1 billion euro, 15 billion Japanese yen, and 650,000 euro in grants for the implementation of various capital projects and programs under the 2025-2026 external borrowing plan to settle outstanding pension liabilities under the contributory pension scheme. The upper legislative chamber also granted approval to the president to raise another $2 billion in the domestic market by the Debts Management Office, DMO. The Senate approval for the loans follows a careful consideration of the report of its Committee on Local and Foreign Debt. Part of the project to be executed is the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway, where the total loan size for Section 1 of Phase 1 of the project is $747 million in the draft borrowing plan. The loans are to be obtained from different international lenders, including the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, China Development Bank, Japanese International Cooperation Agency, and the Islamic Development Bank.
As we are all aware, that what we have, as at the time we are passing the budget, is a deficit budget. So how we make up for the deficit is a combination of what we have in both the local and the foreign debt.
Most interestingly to me, Mr. President, for the first time, I have seen an elaborate provision made for money to be borrowed to build the Eastern Rail Line from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri. A provision that was put in the budget, $3 billion. I didn't need to look at any other thing to support this borrowing plan.
Based on above findings, the committee recommends that the Senate do approve the President's request for capital raising up to $2 billion through the establishment of a foreign currency-dominated financial instrument issuance program in the domestic debt market by the DMO.
Now, on to other news. As the wrongful award of compensation against Nigeria over the alleged breach of a contract with Irish firm Process and Industrial Development, PNID, has once again dominated public discourse, with a London judge, Robin Knowles, who set aside the award, describing the entire proceeding as problematic. Speaking at the Roebuck Lecture at the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators, Knowles observed that he struggled to accept what happened, especially when it came to the calculation of damages. Knowles had in a judgment in Nigeria's appeal overturned the $11 billion award in favor of P&ID by a London arbitration in 2017. Although a three-member arbitration in 2017 found Nigeria guilty of contract breach and awarded the sum of $6.6 billion in favor of P&ID, the judgment debt accrued to $11 billion, with moves to seize Nigeria's assets abroad to enforce the judgment debt. However, following an appeal by Nigeria, Knowles set aside the $11 billion judgment debt on the grounds of fraud and corruption surrounding the contract in the first place, a development that gave much relief to Africa's most populous nation. Now to monetary policy, as the Central Bank of Nigeria yesterday resolved to leave the monetary policy parameters, including the monetary policy rate, that's the MPR, the benchmark interest rate, unchanged at current levels. The Monetary Policy Committee of CBN, after its two-day meeting, unanimously voted to hold policy, retaining the MPR, the rate at which commercial banks borrow from the central bank, at 27.50%. The bank also retained the asymmetric corridor around the MPR at plus 500 minus 100 basis points, cash reserve ratio of deposit money banks at 50% and merchant banks at 16%, and left the liquidity ratio unchanged at 30%. Addressing journalists after the MPC meeting in Abuja, Governor of CBN, Mr. Olayemi Cardoso, said the decision to hold policy rate was premised on the need to sustain the momentum of disinflation and sufficiently contain price pressures. So, Rufai, this would make it the seventh time that the MPC has chosen to hold on those rates. Still a lot of pressure from various avenues, but this is how they are justifying their position.
Pretty much the inflationary pressures are not out yet. That's what they're telling you with this rates. Because when you look at the month-on-month number, the parameters are still the same. Food inflation is still going up month-on-month. You can have the headline inflation reduced, but the month-on-month number, when you dig in, inflationary pressures are not out yet. So considerably, they're holding. But you know what the hold is doing to business? It's strangulating businesses. Because at 27.5 from CBN rates, when you go to the bank, it's well over 30%. How can a business thrive in that environment? And these businesses are competing with some other foreign multinationals that are getting loans at a cheaper rate. But on the flip side of it, we have a very, healthy foreign reserves. But the question is, we've got foreign reserves. At the same time, we're still incurring a lot of loans. So the economic dilemma is something. And we had not sorted out the project we had on ground, but we started incurring more. Take, for instance, this Eastern Corridor project they talked about. It was a project under President Buhari. In fact, it was launched in 2021. And what happened to the project? Only one phase was completed. And now the threshold then was about 3 billion. Today, we are still collecting about 3 billion. Time value of money has been a problem on that project. And the hitherto loans that we collected and the funding patterns we use for that project, we are shifting those funding patterns, trying to get other loans for that project. That project has not been completed. Correct me if I'm wrong. How do we manage projects in this country? Look at the coastal road. We have always talked about the funding. It was said to be about close to 15 trillion. They said they launched the first phase of it about 30 kilometers. Anyway, there have been disputes back and forth about even the threshold of the 30 kilometers that was launched. Some said they've done more, some said they've done less. But now we have to go look for money, over $700 million for this, at a time where people are suffering in this country. Yes, a lot of people are going to make the argument, Rufai, we need infrastructure to be able to grow. You need to open up that corridor. Yes, but also we also need priorities. So we keep increasing the loan threshold. Cumulatively, where most of this money goes in, the loan will be going to about close to 140 trillion threshold. With other expenditure and loans to be collected too in this timeline, definitely might go more than the 135, 140 trillion threshold. At the same time, where the argument that was made for removal of subsidy was, we will take less loans and we'll be able to plow the money into development. So where are the gains for that subsidy? And these are the questions, and that's why you have a lot of economic imbalance. And that's why you have a lack of productivity, despite even the rebasing of the economy. It shows to a large extent we do not have a lot of productivity because we are still the fourth economy on the African continent. About 243 billion for about 199 billion for a population of over 200 million. This was the same economy that as of 2014 had a threshold of over 500 billion. So what do we do? I'll put forward a couple of suggestions as regards how we can do projects. The need for partnerships. But how will those partnerships work? We've seen some of them work in this tax credit scheme. To revitalize the rail line, the need for partnerships. Probably looking at also decentralizing the National Railway Corporation so that we do not have to have people that will buy government cabins and coaches for the trains alone. Maybe you can have some private people also coming. We've seen it work with some projects. We've seen it work with the likes of Dangote and the likes. There are tax rebates, yes, and they get the project done. Probably some people will argue with a better threshold of accountability rather than loading up our loan books and we have to pay interest on. Because when we make the argument, this government has collected a lot of loans, people will say, no, we need the money for development. But that was the same cesspit we went through under President Buhari. And the question is, what's the viability of this project? A need for return on investment. How viable has the Lagos-Ibadan rail line been? What has it brought back to our coffers? And you see all of this conversation on how viable corruption with projects and things like that also span to the P&ID projects. If you read Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala's book, she talked about extensively how people use judgment debts. They will deliberately ensure that they sign contracts with government, things are not executed, they'll take the government to go exactly the replica of what happened in P&ID. When the P&ID revelation came out, we saw a lot of people working in government acting against government. And that's why the judge says he can't just understand how that happened. And sometimes the things that happen in Nigeria is so abysmal. So all of these are intertwined. And we still have many cases of judgment deaths we are still trying to sort out here and there. And some that we are still fighting in some climes. So we need to have a renewed approach to be able to fund our project, and we need to prioritize. Is this the time for those heavy liftings like the coastal road, impacting our loan profile? Should we really be doing this at this point in time? There are basics that people need that are not being met. Yeah, we're building large roads, but over 80% of the hospitals, primary healthcare centers are not in great shape in this country. And we are building roads, but primary healthcare center is not in great shape. Educational system not in great shape. Isn't it time for us to introspect? Let's have a conversation this morning.
Okay. What are the issues? Let's start with the Senate approving $21.5 billion on the global loan request by the Tinubu administration. Well, the first question to ask is, will anybody be surprised? This is a National Assembly, a Senate that is committed to defending the interests of the executive. Ironically, symbolically, historically, we have at this time a Senate that says we are one-on-one with the executive of the federal government of Nigeria. Why, they deny it, some of them deny it consistently, but the truth is that from what we have seen, anything that the executive takes to the Senate passes, which, is contrary to Baron de Montesquieu's policy principle about the separation of powers. So nobody is surprised that this is the case. Now, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he presented that proposal to the Senate, said that this would be about infrastructure, about education, about the health sector, provide relief to Nigerians. So they wanted more money from the EU, they wanted more money from the Japanese, they wanted more money from anywhere else to fund issues in infrastructure, education, health, infrastructure, and all of that. The question we ask, every Senate defines its own character. So this has been passed. But Nigerians will ask the question, what is going to happen hereafter? There's nothing wrong. The professionals tell us, the professionals tell us, the economists, that there's nothing wrong in borrowing. It is what you do with it that matters. So what are they going to do with this approval of $21.5 billion? The ordinary Nigerian people will expect that this would translate to developments and advancements and opportunities in terms of provisions within the social sector. Would this be the case? This is a question to be asked. So this comprehensive borrowing for the 2025-26 fiscal year, these are the questions that Nigerians would ask. When it happens, we will say that it has happened. Now, in the case of the PINID, now this was a subject that we delved into on this table for a very long time. Now, what was the issue? The big issue here is not about Sir Robert Knowles, judge of the Commercial Court in England, saying, well, he didn't know what happened. No, what he was alluding to, that he did not expressly point out, is the fact about the behavior of Nigerian authorities. In the course of that case, we saw how officials of the federal government mismanaged their positions. We saw how there were controversies over the place of arbitration. We saw how the Nigerian government itself was wrong-footing itself in terms of how
which judgment was appropriate and all of that, in a matter that could have been very clear. Sir Robert Knowles, in giving the final judgment, tried, of course, to resolve the issues by issuing the judgment in the favor of Nigeria. The lesson from it is that the Nigerian authorities, either Ministry of Finance or other agencies involved, should know that in other transactions, should know how to go about it. They gave the PI an ID contract to an agency that was not even fully privileged or knowledgeable about the business. There were allegations of corruption. So it didn't follow the normal pattern. So that's why Sir Robert Knowles can come around at an event on Monday in London at the Treasury Institute of Arbitrators in London and say that he didn't know what happened because Nigeria always presents the world with what didn't happen elsewhere. That's the lesson there. And the lesson there is to prevent that kind of arbitrary behavior that seems to be standard practice in Nigeria. The third issue that you brought up was the CBN, right? Retaining all the parameters. Well, the CBN, according to Olayemi Cardoso, the CBN governor, says, they're trying to be cautious, optimistically, to manage the disinflationary trend that they have observed, and to ensure how, the indicators, the positive indicators that they have seen can be further sustained. That is the position. That's what the CBN governor said. And the 12 members of the Monetary Policy Committee all voted in favor of that decision. But the question to ask is that, where does this leave us? The CBN is talking about disinflationary trend. He's talking about foreign exchange volatility. He's talking about cautious optimism. But the Nigerian people, ahead of that, I think is the 101st or whatever meeting of the Monetary Policy Committee meeting. Now, the average Nigerian, in a poll conducted by some of these pollsters, said that Nigerians are expecting, investors are expecting a reduction in interest rates. But what the CBN has tried to do is to hold the rates, whether it's CRR for commercial deposit money banks or for merchant banks. Deposit money banks are 50%, merchant banks are 16%, CRR within that range, the basic rate at 27.5%, all of that, fine. But the average Nigerian is worried about the cost of borrowing. And I think that the long-term objective should be how we get a correspondence between the policies that they come up with and how that works out on the streets, in the marketplace. The average Nigerian is still suffering under the burden of high interest rates. In a poll conducted by one party, the projection was that if you reduce interest rates, then Nigerians will have to, the cost of borrowing will reduce, the average man will also benefit from that. But I get the point about Cardoso and his team saying that, okay, this is cautious optimism time because of disinflationary rates, and they want to see the correspondence between inflation and economic growth.
All right, I'll pick up where you are leaving off, Dr. Abati. With that, I think that the CBN should be commended for their efforts with regards to trying to manage the monetary environment, trying to bring down inflation rates. However, what is being highlighted and what is becoming jarringly obvious is the conversation we had when the huge announcement was made that we were returning to orthodoxy. When we said that, yes, orthodoxy is important, however, we need to remember the peculiarities of the Nigerian space. And I think we've now reached the confluence of those two issues, where you have a central bank that is doing all that's possible with the tools available to them, which is to tinker with the interest rate, well, in this instance, to let the interest rate be, because it is supposed to tame inflation. However, what happens when you have a high interest rate, of course, is that you stifle growth. How do you do that? Of course, it's been explained already. If people can't access credit, businesses can't access credit, it makes it difficult to become more productive, and that trickle-down effect is also not felt by the end user and the consumer. So we're now in this funny place where we've just reported 3.13% GDP growth. However, we know that that's far from enough for us to be able to move Nigerians from a degree of poverty. The Minister of Economic Planning, Coordinating Minister for the Economy, Wale Edun, used the figure 7%. He said what we need is a 7% GDP growth to be able to move in that direction. That's conservative, some people might say, because the multilateral institutions are saying we need double-digit growth in order for us to see some sort of substantial development and evolution out of the current, especially economic disparities, the poverty and the struggles that we see happening. So it goes down to the bare foundation of the issue, which is orthodoxy is great. We've done that part. What is left to happen? Yesterday, we were speaking about the launch of Lagos State 500 billion naira fund for Produce for Lagos, which is all around trying to create food security and try to tame food inflation in that urban center. What does it highlight? It highlights to you that the causes of inflation in Nigeria are not necessarily caused by what happens at the monetary policy rate and are not necessarily going to be tamed by what happens there. Are we able, how much progress have we done with regards to securing to food security? Our farmers going back to the farms, are they able to produce food? What about the value chain? What about post-harvest losses? And so forth and so forth. When we're talking food inflation, there's so many things that we can unpack and attribute to what's happening there. Just yesterday, we had the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Reduction. Again, we ask ourselves, what is being done to resettle the farmers in the Middle Belt who have been displaced with all of the insecurity? So yes, it's important for us to have the monetary policy tools. It's important for the Minister of Finance, the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, to also work in collaboration with the CBN. But the systemic issues are bigger because they're structural, they're fundamental. Food, energy, logistics. Now, when we speak logistics, it takes me to my next point, because the passing of that MTEF budget for spending focuses a lot on infrastructure. However, when we speak about infrastructure and the infrastructure deficit, I think it's unfortunate that we largely focus on road density metrics. So what we focus a lot of our infrastructure spending on is building roads, building bridges, and so forth, which is very important because they create that access that we're talking about. But the other parameters, for example, I'm not sure most people can recognize the Minister of Water Resources and Sanitation if he's pointed out to them, whereas there's massive infrastructural deficit that needs to be made with regards to access to potable water. I mean, we've made it a norm that clean water doesn't come out of our taps at free will. There's no municipal water. There's no, water has now become a privatized industry, and that will not allow us to move out of multidimensional poverty as quickly as we would like to. So all these things brought together, I think there's still a need for us to go back to the drawing board and see how all of the other sectors of the economy, how all of the other ministries and portfolios will be able to do their part. Because once we get the structural issues that are creating inflation, once we're able to confront those issues, then these monetary policy tools will also become more impactful, and they'll generally be more reprieve for businesses and, of course, for the individual.